First and foremost, condolences. Now sometimes when such atrocities are committed, there's no simple explanation. Now Will Cornick was just 16 years old when the cruel and calculated and emotionless teenager was jailed for life, and he was told that he would have to spend a minimum term of 20 years in jail after he admitted that he felt an adrenaline rush and a thrill like no other after taking his teacher's life. Will Cornick had bladed his teacher in front of students. Let that sink in for a moment. The victim, 61-year-old Ann Maguire, had changed the lives of countless students in her career as a teacher that spanned over 40 years. Now she was the complete opposite of Will Cornick. Will Cornick was considered an oddball, and he would laugh at grotesque things and sad things. For example, someone having cancer. Now Ann Maguire was considered optimistic, friendly, and always super positive. She loved having a talk with her students. Now she had worked at Corpus Christie Catholic College in Leeds, and she was due to retire soon before DM. She only had 5 months left before her retirement. Now according to the people who knew Will Cornick, who was actually called William, he had 2 very loving and supporting parents. He had also joined Corpus Christi Catholic College in Year 7, and staff had described Will as hard-working, polite, and a student whom regularly achieved 100% attendance. In his 4.5-year school record, Will only had 5 incidences that was considered misbehaviour, and he had no criminal record. Most importantly enough, he was not known to carry a blade. Now, as an almost model student, Will Cornick's demeanour and attitude had completely shifted when he had collapsed during a holiday in Cornwall. The collapse led to Will finding out that he was diabetic, and right there and then, his worldview had warped and shifted. Due to his condition, the academically gifted Will had dwelled on the fact that being a diabetic meant that he could not achieve his dream of joining the army. Will's resentment and anger and frustration and spite and fury was then redirected to Ann Maguire, the Spanish teacher. For 3 long years, William had spoke to friends about wanting to blade and K and M Mrs. Maguire brutally, who was married and also had 2 adult children. This was conveyed in person and also on Facebook Messenger. In fact, in Christmas of 2013, Will had said that he wanted to K Ann Maguire, who had taught him Spanish since Year 7, and then spend the rest of his life in jail so he would not have to worry about life or money. Now, so deep-rooted was his grudge towards Ann Maguire, for undisclosed reason, Will Cornick admitted to psychiatrists that he had actively made notes and planned DM, actually wanting it to take place 4 days earlier than it was carried out. Will had also put a message on Facebook where he asked if anyone would M Ann Maguire for a payment of just £10. Of course, nobody accepted, but people thought that Will was just being Will, and all this was made in jest and some sick joke. Now, the only clash of personalities on record was when on February 2014, Will had failed to complete his Spanish homework, which resulted in Will's mum and dad being called to the school. And then on April 24th of 2014, Will Cornick could not hold in his urges anymore. On the morning of the M, Will had told classmates that he had come to school with a blade and a bottle of JD to celebrate after he K's Mrs. Maguire. He actually then pulled out the blade to show his classmates. Now, Will's classmates did not regard Will as violent and took his words as nothing more than bravado, but then Will promised to K anyone who revealed his plans, and this took the students back a bit. Now, shortly before 11:30 a.m, Will had sat down at his computer in Mrs. Maguire's Spanish class. Will had then taken out the blade and revealed it to his friend, who was sitting next to him, asking his friend and classmate to check the serrated edges and tell me if it's sharp. Will then chillingly declared, "I'm going to use this blade and I'm going to end Mrs. Maguire with it." Will then gave a cheeky little smile. Now his friend was stunned to silence, lost for words and scared. He refused to take the blade or test it out. But more importantly, his friend nor the other classmates spoke up or went to the teachers and advised that Will had a blade, something that a lot of them would regret for the rest of their lives. Now with that, Will had got up out of his seat, adjusted his school clothes and then made his way next door where Mrs. Maguire was teaching. Now Leeds Crown Court heard as Will left the classroom he winked at his classmates for the last time. Without warning, Will Cornick had approached his teacher, blade gripped tightly in hand as she was leaning over her desk, helping the students with their work. Will had then launched his attack from behind and then thrust the metal object into the teacher's back with all his might. Times. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, again and again and again. Full force. Now Mrs. Maguire was stunned, and she still managed to stagger out into the corridor as the class ascended into a frenzy of panic and alarm and disarray and loud shouts and screams as students ran in every direction. Some hid and some went to other classrooms. Now Will Cornick ran after his teacher. Mrs. Maguire had been bladed 7 times in the back and once in the neck, with a blade the length of 21 centimetres. Despite being in critical condition, Ann Maguire managed to scream, and Susan Francis, who was head of languages, had heard those yells and shouts, and she followed the heart-wrenching sound to see Will almost stalking his prey. Now Susan quickly ran forward and had gotten between Will and Mrs. Maguire and took the teacher into another classroom before barricading the door closed. Will Cornick followed, and he made it all the way to the classroom on the other side of the glass pane and watched as Susan tried to protect Mrs. Maguire with all her might. Leeds Crown Court heard Will was emotionless, and then he walked away as if nothing mattered and he had not just bladed his own teacher. Now in the aftermath, Will put his hands up as if to surrender as more teachers came. He then went back to his classroom before sitting down at his desk. Will then coldly proclaimed, "Good times," but he also said it was a shame that he had not killed his teacher. However, Mrs. Maguire had passed out and she was pronounced dead later that day. At Leeds Crown Court, Will Cornick was jailed for life and was told that he would have to serve a minimum term of 20 years in jail before being considered for release after being found guilty of the M. The judge also warned him that he may never be released. Now, unprecedentedly, Will was able to be joined in the dock by his mum and dad. Again, they were loving and supporting parents, and they had no idea that this is what their son planned, and they was ridden with guilt and also grief. During his time in prison, it was also said that Will was ordered to speak to specialists so they could try and work out how such an academically gifted student who could have achieved such great things in life could become so unhinged and so cold and so brash and so emotionless, to the point where he admitted to psychiatrists that he could not give a S about her family. It's either take her life or be killed. Now, Will Cornick also revealed that he had planned to M other teachers, and they included Andrew Kellett and also Sinead Miley, who was pregnant at the time. Condolences. Stay safe.